In the sewers, several people in protective suits were filtering the sewage for the presence of mana residues. While working, one of the guys decided that nothing would be found for today, until his gaze fell on a sparkling stone high up in the wall. Thinking that a crystal of this size would allow him to pass the daily standard, a guy in a white suit began to wade through the water straight to him. It was difficult to reach the goal, but the employee decided to take a chance. As expected, he failed. With a splash in all directions, he fell into the water. His partner immediately rushed to his aid, worrying and asking if he was okay. To this, the hero of the occasion replied that everything was fine. And gradually he began to rise, holding his hand at the place of impact. A worried colleague took off the protective mask behind which a pretty girl with blonde hair was hiding Yumin. The girl was a college employee. Adjusting her glasses, she again turned to the guy with the question, "Why is he so? After all, it's not worth it." But the guy who was still hiding his face didn't say anything. He just thought that there was no future in his life. Then other workers joined in, assuring him that there was no way to get there. It is dangerous to splash in this water, because it is infected with mana crystal moss. For ordinary people like them, this is a deadly poison, one careless movement, and you can die. After removing the protective mask, the dark-haired man just awkwardly grinned at them and scratching his head, agreed. It was Kang Hyunmoo. After finishing the job, the guy swore at the top of his voice in the locker room. He was not happy with the salary that was given for the work done for today. It was only $30. How should he live on it? There is no justice in this world, no chance for a better life. Things could have been very different when 30 years ago, dungeons began to appear all over the world. In them, people awakened superpowers in themselves and the world smoothly entered a new era. However, not everyone has a chance to develop superpowers. The user started with 0 stars. This was the assessment given by the Henma system. Suddenly someone called out to the guy, interrupting his thoughts, thereby forcing him to turn around. It was a local lawyer, Robert Lee. The old man approached him and offered his sincere condolences to him, saying that he wanted to hand over the inheritance from his father. But he did not understand anything, he just said that he had no parents. Kang Hyunmoo's life is like this. Lee stretched out his hand from which the pendant hung and gave it to the youngster, who could not refuse. Already in the manoprocessing working quarter of Weizong, the dark-haired man told about his gift to a colleague. He thought it was some kind of trinket until the girl exclaimed that it was a stone of return. And she told me more about him. This is an artifact that hunters used to return from the dungeons. Henma didn't understand why he would need it. And I asked the blonde about it while she was carefully examining the jewelry. She didn't know herself, because he didn't need to go to the dungeons. The guy was a little hurt by this, but Yumin quickly realized this and apologized. She did not want to offend him. He said that he understands everything and is not offended at all. To change the subject, the girl asked if he had heard of Li Jite, to which he replied that he was not interested. Just at that moment, the bus Hen needed arrived, on which he went home. Already at home, there was some kind of TV program on the old TV, in which it was announced that today the Tae-sun clan was leading Li Ji-tae into battle. The raid on the Danjin Tabak, which has 5 stars, was crowned with success. It was the 3rd successful raid of a 5-star dungeon in the world, which was true. The leader of that expedition, Li Ji-tae, commented on the reason for this success in such a way that he owes this victory to all members of the expedition. The dark-haired guy was sitting in front of this TV almost not listening to what was being said there. He was examining the object in his hand, which the lawyer had previously given him. And so, still carefully looking at the mysterious pendant, the same Li Ji-tae was shown on TV. A cute guy with white hair told how proud he was that with this raid they showed the whole world the power of Korea. Of course, everyone will want to be in his place, because he is incredibly rich and strong, and also popular and beautiful. While Henmu only got this useless pebble. Such thoughts visited his head, and he just wants to escape from poverty. If he had at least one chance, he would have taken full advantage of it. Clutching the stone tightly in his hand, he solemnly decided that he would do anything for the sake of wealth. His hand lit up, or rather what was in it. This scared the youngster, forcing him to pull away with an exclamation, but not to let go of the object, which glows brighter and brighter. And suddenly a sign appears with the inscription "Welcome." The guy appears in an incomprehensible place for him, starting to look around quickly. It looks like an empty abandoned city with broken windows in its houses. Only the moon stands out, which shines brightly with a red and bloody light. His first impressions are that what a terrible place. A sign suddenly pops up in front of him and starts telling him to overcome himself. His body gained a source of mana and circulation began. Hyunmoo didn't understand what was going on and from where did he have mana. And the table kept saying that he had achieved the impossible. Having the lowest of the levels, he entered the location of the hell level. I also got the SSS level luck effect, which will increase compensating for the difference between his level and the location level. Hyunmoo has been in the hell level location for a few minutes and has already received the title of the strongest in hell. The guy in complete ignorance is asking questions, the answers to which he will not get. Just that he's the only survivor. The dark-haired man starts screaming in confusion, looking for is there anyone alive? But he notices the crystal moss that is already familiar to him. Remembering that little piece of crystal that I tried to get in the sewer. It would cost a couple of $100, how much will they give for this? A couple of thousand or a couple of tens of thousands, for sure. That was all Hyunmoo was thinking about, looking at the crystal with delight. And he decided to snatch one, considering how lucky he was. Until a sudden sharp pain pierced him from the back. Blood spills from his mouth, and he drops the crystal. The condition of his body has received poisoning and paralysis, so it becomes hard for him to breathe sharply. The guy clutches his chest and falls to the ground in agony, writhing in pain. The sign warns as if nothing had happened that he was attacked, but it's too late. A scream escapes from his mouth, followed by foam. Who attacked him if there is no one around? Hyunmoo was confused and scared, but there was nothing he could do but die. He was killed and the killer is poisonous dust they told him last. Is this the end, or is it just a bad dream? The guy opens his brown eyes and notices that he is still alive, but how? The first thing he thinks is that it's a dream, until he gets up on his knees and sees the same table in front of him. It says that the task has begun, and its goal is to survive until dawn. The dark-haired man gets up in horror and starts running from wherever his eyes look. All sweaty from nerves, he quickly runs without stopping and throws his jacket over himself. He didn't know who set it up, but he was ready to take revenge on them for it. Another blow and the guy is lying dead again, having lived only 5 minutes and 22 seconds from the last death. And so it was repeated 8 more times over and over again, and all he decided to do was beg for forgiveness. Kneeling, he bent down and began to turn to God, but this plan, as expected, did not work. Death overtook him again, but this time a little later, he managed to live 11 minutes and 13 seconds, almost twice since the last time. After 11 deaths, the dark-haired man came up with the idea to strengthen his resistance to toxic substances, which he did. But not everything is so simple. He was subsequently killed, even if he managed to extend his lifespan for a few more minutes. Already 14 deaths later, the guy realized that he managed to survive longer just by inhaling this dirty air, so he decided to continue doing this, increasing resistance to toxic substances. Sitting in the lotus position, Hyunmoo inhaled and exhaled this air, remembering breathing exercises. It reminded him of how some man in a suit taught him to inhale deeply and deeper than usual and exhale also deeper than below the lungs. And little Hyunmoo listened to him and did as he ordered, while he praised him for what the dark-haired one was doing well. Of all the children the man worked with, Hyunmoo gave at least some hope. And these exercises were worth it, because thanks to them the guy got a new level and finally exhaled with relief. But he was killed anyway, but with what result? He managed to live for almost 2 hours, or rather an hour and 41 minutes and 21 seconds. After 28 deaths, the guy already felt so light that it seemed strange to him. He wondered what was wrong with his level, and it turned out that the concentration of poison in his blood was exceeded. He received a rare skill thanks to which the departure effect no longer causes damage to him. The dark-haired man did not understand how it happened, because he was just breathing poisonous dust, but he was glad of such an announcement, although he did not believe it. Deciding to go for a walk around the neighborhood, the guy set off. Everything was in ruins and crystal moss grew everywhere. Hyunmoo picked up one of these and, thinking about selling them all, if only they were real, considered it. Until the table with the question whether he wants to collect crystal moss appeared. To which the guy agrees out loud and the moss disappears, which initially scared the dark-haired man. He had an inventory that he didn't even know about and enthusiastically began to study the table, deciding that he could do a lot of things. Until his joy was interrupted by a strange sound in the air. Turning around, the guy looked in the direction of the approaching sound and was horrified. With all his legs, he rushed to run away from the attacking mosquitoes with screams, but they did not lag behind the victim, continuing to follow. The small predator surrounded its target without letting it do anything. His achievement of the strongest in hell brought him an increase in abilities, but this will not help him in any way from the mosquitoes of the 3rd level. They attacked in a swarm from all sides, flying into the mouth of a frightened and defenseless guy who could not help but scream. The attackers clung to him everywhere and began to suck his blood and for some reason began to explode, tearing the poor man's body apart, thereby killing him. The life expectancy this time was 6 hours, 18 minutes and 1 second, which is already quite a lot. Having died this time, the guy got a new level. Opening his eyes, the first thing Hyunmoo saw was that he had received an average achievement due to the fact that he had killed more than 100 monsters at the same time, and his level of the effect of poisonous blood was increased. Still lying in a ruined building, the guy was trying to figure out how it was. Did the mosquitoes go with his blood? But there was an alarming warning causing him to jump. He was infected with an infection because of which his health will decrease by a small percentage every minute. Hyunmoo was annoyed. What the fuck, he just woke up, so what the fuck? And having lost his balance, he fell hitting a chair with his hand, thereby breaking his leg and getting a new disassembly skill. The infection began to affect the cells of his body, and therefore his health dropped by 10%. To recover, the effect of the last giver was activated and the regeneration process began. After some time, while the regeneration was going on, the guy stuck with a tortured face. He was already sick of all these notifications. Only now he noticed his new skill, but did not notice when exactly he received it. Although there is nothing supernatural about it, it helps and it looks like he got it by breaking a chair leg, at least that's what he thought. After thinking it all over, he looked into the broken window on which the mosquito was sitting, and all that the dark-haired man was thinking at that moment was that there were even mosquitoes the size of a fist. Fuck this world, although the truth is there are more possibilities, so there are advantages. Remembering about his new disassembly skill, Hyunmoo decided to try it and disassemble the chair. Taking it in his hands, the chair itself collapsed and disassembled into parts from the back to the legs, and the guy just watched with delight. This gave him ideas, because if he got a skill by breaking a chair, then maybe if he creates something, he will also get a skill? And he decided to try. Having assembled an ordinary stick from the legs of a disassembled chair, he managed to get a new assembly skill. The dark-haired man jumped up with joy and shouted, "What happened?" He has already received as many as 2 skills, although he thought he would do it later, but perhaps decided to start now. Gathering his courage, Hyunmoo rolled up the sleeves of his jacket and solemnly decided that he would make a shelter for himself. He didn't know how much longer he would have to stay in this ruined world, and what enemies he would face. He would have to make a shelter for himself anyway, and then maybe he could survive longer. To begin with, he decided to use all his crystal moss and began to take it out of the inventory, wondering how much mana was in it. But at some point he came across a newspaper lying next to his leg, and picking it up, the guy began to read what it says. But the language in which the newspaper was written was not very clear to the dark-haired man, and he received a new foreign language skill. What does not count skills, the guy thought, and ordered to hide, waving to her. And he continued trying to read what was written there about the double-star Ji-tae Lee. Hyunmoo immediately thought of Lee Ji-tae, who is from the Tae-sun Guild, and thoughtfully stuck in the newspaper, thinking that it looks like he is on the same planet, but it is not clear at what time. Turning towards the window, he decided that maybe this is the future of our planet? And the guy sighed and scratched his head and realized that even if this was the case, he couldn't do anything about it anyway and put the newspaper away. But he can do something else right now, and sitting on the cards next to a bunch of infernal mosquitoes ordered to disassemble. Having received the sting of wings and the blood of infernal mosquitoes, the dark-haired man lay down with shortness of breath to rest. A lot of ingredients turned out, but what to do with them, Hyunmoo did not know, and stood up, picked up one of the items and said the words to create. All the objects connected to form a hellish dart that the guy immediately began to consider. It is not known how effective he is and how he managed to make a rare weapon the first time, but the dark-haired man with a grin on his face decided to test it. He spent some time creating darts from all the available ingredients, at the same time flexing his arm and his shoulders. One of the items remained, and as with the previous ones, he stretched out his hand with the words create, but this time he created an egg secret of the legendary level. At this moment, notifications from the table with congratulations that he had received the achievement of creating the first legendary item and thereby increased his ability to create. The egg was almost the size of a fist, which amazed Hyunmoo, who admired his creation. The table began to tell the guy that it takes care of him so that it hatches and the chance that the embryo will be alive is 50%. He will be able to revive an item only if he meets certain criteria, or you can spend your rewards on reviving it. After thinking about it, the guy hid the egg under his jacket and was overwhelmed by reality from embarrassment. But suddenly a rumble was heard from behind, which scared the dark-haired man. Turning around, he looked from behind the wall at what kind of sound was there, and saw a goblin in the window who was holding a weapon in his hand looking around. Green noticed Hyunmoo when he stuck it in him in shock because he didn't know that there were goblins here. Baring his fangs, the goblin jumped down from the window, resolutely heading towards the guy who had not yet realized. When the evil spirits were very close and ready to strike, the guy automatically bounces off. Noticing the stairs, he understands that there is no other way and he needs to climb. Taking his legs in his hands, the dark-haired man rushed up the stairs while the goblin passed him over, waving his sword. Rising higher, Hyunmoo called for inventory to get weapons for battle. Taking out a stick, he turned around in the direction where the goblin should have been, but he wasn't there. The green one turned out to be smarter and came in from the back landing hard, letting the guy know that he was there. Torbjorn Red Helmet was the name of the goblin, and he had the 20th level, which means that he can easily defeat the guy. The creature wasted no time and jerked at the guy, waving his sword right in front of Hyunmoo's face, but he was able to dodge by jumping back. Then he struck another blow and then another, but the dark-haired man was able to evade everyone. But because of the last attack, the guy lost his stick, substituting it to reflect the enemy's sword. After that, the goblin said something in a language unknown to Hyunmoo, who was extremely surprised that he spoke. And Green did not stop and continued to attack. Swinging his sword this time, he managed to hit the guy, leaving a large wound on his chest. After that, the dark-haired man did not give up and took out hell darts from his inventory and threw them towards the enemy with the words that he should eat them. The goblin did not flinch for a second and calmly reflected them with a smirk on his face, cutting them in half without worrying about anything. Hyunmoo just stood there and tried to regain his breath, holding onto the wound sight, breathing anxiously. Despite Torbjorn's skills, however, one dart hit him in the hand and the poison gradually began to penetrate into the blood of the green through the hand, forming ulcers in this place. But it didn't bother him at all, and he easily cut off his arm with a dart. Hyunmoo told him, even though he didn't know if he understood him, that he was a moron for some reason, cut off his hand and realized that his blood could be poisoned on darts. The wound inflicted earlier by the goblin suddenly opened and blood gushed out of it. This forced him to distract from the enemy for a second, which allowed him to hide and repeat the trick from behind. The dark-haired man already realized that he was finished when he saw him from above. Jumping over the guy with a somersault, the goblin's sword struck a crushing blow, and Hyunmoo passed out, fell to the floor. Green triumphantly stepped on the guy with one foot to show his coolness and turned around and began to leave, speaking in human, that it turns out they had not killed all the people yet. But he didn't know that the one he thought was dead was still alive and watching him leave. When the goblin left, the guy's regeneration mode was activated with the help of the last survivor's perk, as his stamina level dropped below 10%. Hyunmoo tried to get up, but the wound had not healed yet, so he failed and fell on his back, simultaneously calling the goblins, saying that he would take revenge on them. The table that formed the guy was highlighted by the fact that the task was completed, because of which he could finally exhale with relief. Since he had succeeded, he was able to survive the first night in hell. For the work done, he received 1 silver chest, but a compensation bonus was activated for the difference between his level and the level of the task, so instead of 1 silver chest, he received 1 gold. Also, now he can use the return stone before the start of the next task, which will begin in 2 weeks. The dark-haired man decided to take advantage of this opportunity, and reached for the pendant hanging around his neck and took it out, and squeezed it in his fist, wanting to return as soon as possible. The decoration lit up, and when the light disappeared, the guy opened his eyes. All dirty and exhausted, he found himself lying in a puddle on a residential street next to houses while the rain was dripping on him. Rising up, he looked around and immediately realized where he was, yelling with joy that he was back. Clenching his lips, he tore the pendant from his neck and was already about to hit her on the ground, scolding his father for what he was thinking about leaving him this. But he was stopped by the memories of those painful days, and not only when he found crystal moss or when he received his first disassembly skill or his first legendary item egg secret, which he never discovered. Angry that he couldn't break it, the dark-haired man took it in his fist and began to squeeze. Apparently hearing his squeals of joy, some girl came out of the house nearby. Noticing him all in ragged clothes through the fence, the girl who turned out to be his blonde colleague Yu Ming opened the gate and started calling his name, which alarmed the dark-haired man. Running up to the guy, the girl in the jacket began to anxiously ask why he was getting wet in the rain here, because it was mana rain and he could go. Taking off her jacket, the bespectacled woman threw it on Hyunmoo and called him to her room as soon as possible. The puzzled guy had no choice but to listen to her and follow her into the house. Being in the house, wrapped up in a jacket, he greeted his savior a little excitedly, who at that moment was taking out a decontaminator against mana precipitation. Taking it in her hands, she began to pester the dark-haired man to cleanse him of mana, although he said that he was not poisoned. But the blonde did not give up so easily and began to maliciously shout at the poor guy that it was as if he himself did not work as a collector of crystal moss waste, and did not know how dangerous he was and when the departure would be too late to regret. After listening to her screams, Hyunmoo still agreed to go wash up and went to the shower. When he finished, he left the bathroom with one towel on his hips while wiping his hair with the other. The dark-haired man thanked the girl for the shower and asked her what day it was. To which she replied over her shoulder that today was the 11th of September. The guy was shocked and asked if it was true that the 11th. The girl just looked at the half-naked man questioningly, and asked if anything had happened. It was impossible to reach him for 2 days, and she had to work alone. Hyunmoo didn't answer anything, flying in his thoughts, putting his finger under his chin thoughtfully about the fact that only 2 days had passed, although it felt like he had been there for several years. Yu Ming only looked at the guy in front of her, moving from head to torso looking at his abs as he continued to think about his own. That place seems to be a working quarter. Why did he end up there? Because he was at home before teleportation. He would have hesitated for a long time, but the girl, clearing her throat, still decided to pull herself together and look away from the body of her colleague, and he realized immediately covered himself with a towel, arriving slightly in shock. After thinking about it, the blonde decided that he needed clothes and wanted to go to the store to buy them for him. Of course there were his past clothes, but they were all infected and also torn. Therefore, she ordered the dark-haired man not to put it on and hiding behind the wall for the last time said that she would be back soon and he would not leave here. After checking that the blonde left, Hyunmoo calmly called the inventory, studying what he has there. Noticing the golden chest that he received as a reward for the task, the guy clicked on it and a table appeared that announced that he had received a luck perk of SSS rank that would positively affect the quality of his awards. Several gold and silver-colored cards were highlighted, which gradually began to burn down, leaving one legendary with the skill of help in battle. The dark-haired man was extremely surprised because it is difficult to get any skill, and it is almost impossible to get a legendary one. It seems that only 7 hunters around the world have a legendary skill. Does this really mean that he is the 8th? And he began to consider his new skill of help in battle and hope that this help was for him, since there was no description. Clenching his palm into a fist, he confidently directed him forward, and at the same moment Yu Min returned with new clothes in her hands. Who was impressed by what she saw, not understanding what he was doing, she asked the half-naked guy with a towel over his neck. But then I decided to just pretend that I didn't see it, which Hyunmoo was glad about. A few minutes later, while the guy was getting dressed, sitting down at the table, the blonde began to explain that in a good way she should have taken him to the hospital, but he seemed to her unharmed. That's why she decided to bring him to her home. But she didn't understand something, because only those who have superpowers don't need to worry about mana poisoning, and she didn't have them with him. Because of this, I decided to ask if he has them, and if so, then why does he work as a collector? To which he replied that he actually only recently acquired these abilities, and this answer made the girl think. But Hyunmoo changed the subject, remembering that Yu-min was talking about some kind of research in which she also takes part. Bespectacled agreed and said that this is a study of crystal moss. The guy was delighted with an excellent opportunity, and asked for help by stretching his hand forward while the girl was interested in what the request was. Hyunmoo's hand lit up with a purple light, and he said that he had messed up something, but he did not know how much money he could ask for it. The blonde was fucked up when she saw crystal moss weighing 1 kilogram in his hand in the place of the other world, and the guy continued as if nothing had happened that since she was researching crystal moss, then she'd better know how much this piece costs. The girl from what she saw already screamed so that it could be heard even on the street, because it can't be. She was so amazed by the crystal moss that she couldn't stop rejoicing, and she decided to ask where he found it. To which he waved off, answering the question with a question whether it is important at all. Of course it was important, because it is not so easy to find crystal moss of such purity. It deserves not only 4 stars, but even 5. And Hyunmoo only turned the topic to Yu-min, who said that she was collecting samples for research, which she confirmed. But first he did not say that he would give it to her, he showed it to her only then that he needed her help. The blonde looks angrily at the guy, saying that he should continue to say that he exactly needs help. The dark-haired man brought his face close to the girl's face, and said that she would help him legally sell this sample. But there was a problem that made the girl doubt that she would be able to fulfill the request, because a sample of such volume and purity would require the registration of a whole bunch of documents. Only if it was smaller, it would be easier to sell. What the guy took as the fact that it was a matter of volume, and even without blinking an eye, he easily broke the crystal in half, showing the girl. For which she was ready to tear the guy apart, and shouting at him, she began to pound on his back until the dark-haired man said that he had more and even more. Because of what the blonde already burst into tears, wondering if it was true that he had more, and he continued to eat and asked if she could now sell that broken crystal moss. The girl, wiping her tears under her glasses, only agreed, and the guy began to set conditions for her, showing with his fingers that there were 2 of them. The first condition was that she did not tell anyone how this crystal moss got to her, and the second was that she did not tell anyone that she was selling it for him. The blonde still did not have time to agree, saying that at least it's better than seeing him break such a sample, because for her it's so terrible to see. Hyunmoo didn't understand if it was really so terrible, and she started screaming again that he didn't know anything about crystals. Crystal moss of such purity can be mined only in the very first dungeon in history, and these samples that the guy brought are unique and priceless, and their value is greater than the money they are worth. And thrusting the dark-haired man right under his nose sheets of paper with the image of these samples with a description, continues that he just takes such a priceless sample and breaks it right in front of her eyes. For which the guy apologizes, thinking that they are all the same anyway. And going to leave for the last time, he repeats that she should sell this sample, and then, depending on how much they will give for it, he will think about what to do next with the rest. Yu-ming, noticing that he is already going to take a bag with his last infected clothes and leave, offers to go to him tomorrow for clothes and that he can spend the night with her. The guy turns around in shock, not understanding whether she is joking or not, but agrees and stays. The night passed quietly, and in the morning the girl was going to meet with the buyer, leaving the guy alone in bed and waving goodbye left, after which the dark-haired man began to think that she scares him, though not always, but sometimes there are moments. A week later, Hyunmoo decided this time to go with Yu-min to sell the crystal, but she did not understand why, and the guy only replied that just in case, you never know what would happen. Although the girl still insisted that this is not such a dangerous business as it seems to him, and nothing like this will happen. Although he asked for it himself, but he knows that many crystal merchants are desperate people outside the law who have nothing to lose, and even though they will offer a very high price for a person to bring them all their supplies, and then who knows what they will start. Hyunmoo had a bad feeling. Thinking about it, the guy went in the wrong direction at all, but it's good that the girl noticed it and pulled him up to her, saying where she needed to go. When he reached the meeting place, there were 2 types sitting at neighboring tables. Hyunmoo thought that the one who was fatter and there was a buyer and got a little worried, but the girl took him to another person. Approaching the right table, Yu-min politely greeted the stranger, introducing him to Hyunmoo as a business partner. The old man extended his hand in greeting and called his name Park Wiso, to which the guy repeated and shook hands in response. Releasing his hand, it seemed to the dark-haired man that, surprisingly, the old man's grip was quite strong and he was not sure at all that he could defeat him if he attacked. Because of this, a table was displayed activating the perk of the strongest in hell, which gave a compensation bonus for the difference between his level and the level of the task. But the guy was not going to fight, so he told her to disappear. Having already sat down at the table, the blonde put a bag of crystals on it, allowing the buyer to examine them, which he did. When he finished, he asked which account to transfer the money to which the girl answered him, and the old man took off his hat, pressed it to his chest, bent down a little, and began to say goodbye, saying how nice it was to deal with them, also not forgetting about Hyunmoo, and then left them. The girl thought it was strange because he had never said goodbye before, which made the guy nervous, thinking that he could guess that he was the miner of all these crystals. But the blonde distracted him from his thoughts by starting to make fun of the guy, that allegedly he thought that the old man would pull out a knife and start threatening to give them the goods, because of which the guy was embarrassed, frowning. And the girl began to slap him on the back, reassuring him that she admits that everything could have gone the way he imagined and it happens, and then she took out her phone and handed it to the guy in the face, in which it was written that there was $1 million in the account. Let's go back to the old man, who did not seem suspicious to Hyunmoo for nothing. Sitting in the car, he was asked about the transaction, to which he replied that everything went well like all the others for today. If you count the total volume of samples for today, you will get quite a lot. The unknown liked this news, and taking one out of the bag, he turned to Park Why-so with the question, what does he think about him? The purity of the sample is similar to those that can be obtained only in 5-star dungeons, which means that the hunter who extracted it is very strong and he is alone, the old man replied. The questioner thought about it, thinking that it would not be easy to find him, because he might be from some foreign clan, but then why would they come to Korea? And then he asked who sold him this crystal. Park Why replied that it was a girl, but this time she came with her alleged business partner, and he should gather more information about it. The man in the white suit began to reflect that whoever got this crystal was able to overcome very difficult trials, and then thanked the old man for his work. And putting the crystal back into the bag, he continued, already asking Park Why-so about what kind of power a person who could get such a product alone should have. To this he replied that only the captain is capable of such a thing, forcing him to laugh and request to collect all the information he can on the student Yu-min and her business partner. The old man could only agree, because the person he was talking to just now was Captain Lee Ji-tae himself. A couple of days later, Hyunmoo began to train hard, improving his fitness by doing pull-ups. Having done 150 this time, he finally jumped off the horizontal bar, and the table told him that he had broken his record in strength training. But he was not happy, because if he had been at home and not in hell, he would have easily done another 1,000, and here everything is given with such great effort. Lying on the ground, he was exhausted and dripping with sweat. He began to think how long he was already here. But then he was warned that there were 18 hours, 14 minutes and 58 seconds left before the next task. And so a couple of outings later, he finally began to realize that how much time he spends here, the same amount passes in real life. And this means that if he subtracts the current indicator from the initial value of the time before the task, he will get the time spent here. So he began to count on his fingers. The only thing the guy still can't understand is why he teleports from here to unpredictable places every time. He started trying to portray it on the ground by drawing with a stick. Hyunmoo was a little annoyed because everything else is somehow understandable to him, but not this, and he began to let this anger out, shouting how he got sick of it. Why can't he teleport to a normal place? And cursing, he sat down on the ground, burying himself in large boulders, still not understanding. Over time, he calmed down and remembered about the skill he received from the chest earlier. This skill of help in battle remembers the user's techniques and helps to perform them with greater accuracy, as well as helps to predict the strategy and techniques of the enemy. After learning about this, the dark-haired man, bandaging his palms with bandages, began to think that in this game such a skill could be qualified as a cheat or hacking. The fact that he received such a skill from the system itself only means that without him at this level it is simply impossible to survive. Resolutely standing next to the pair, he was already ready to swing and hit it, but first he activated the skill of help in battle and then hit the pair with all his might. So the next blow flew by and several more subsequent ones at once. The only thing that pleased the guy was that each time he hit more and more accurately. The last blow already tore the pair into pieces that flew in all directions. The dark-haired man himself was blown away by his capabilities, and then realized what exactly the skill of help in battle means. His delight was interrupted by the notification of a new companion task for a beginner, the essence of which is to kill entry-level scarecrows. The guy was a little angry that he was called a beginner and began to resent why he was not given it at the first level and was given when he was already on the 7th. But then he began to think about the task, remembering that he had not yet met any scarecrows. But he needed to raise the level, so he was going to go on a search. Throwing on a white jacket and buttoning the Olympic mask on top, he set off on his way. Going into some alley from which a strong wind was blowing, the guy found a staircase leading down and decided to go down. At the bottom were the very entry-level scarecrows that he needed, so he began to consider them, thinking that it could not be that they were entry-level opponents, and they even seemed quite scary to him. Approaching one of them, Hyunmoo only now noticed that their level is not specified, even if it is written that the initial one. And I began hoping that they would not suddenly come to life to imagine that already goosebumps ran through my body. Picking up Dosteka, not knowing what they are capable of, he hid behind her, pulling out a hellish dart. Pointing it at one of the scarecrows, he threw it straight into the neck of the target, and then crouched down and hid completely. But there was no point in this. The scarecrow did not even shy away, and the guy decided that they did not work and he would deal with them quickly. So he swung his fist with all his might at the nearest scarecrow, but it did not look like he broke something, just moved it a little. When suddenly the iron scarecrows came to life, which alerted the guy, their eyes lit up red and they announced the beginning of the first level battle. They had just set themselves a level equal to the guy's level, that is, the 7th, and confidently rushed into the attack. Hyunmoo was able to dodge the first blow. He was lucky that at least they were not as fast as goblins, so he also succeeded from everyone else. In real life, the 7th level is equal to 5 years of service in the army or working as a bodyguard, but in hell, the 7th level is like a beginner. Slipping a little back, the guy decided to go on the attack himself, activating the skill of help in battle, confidently headed for the scarecrow. When they surrounded him and were ready to attack, he himself was already ready for a retaliatory blow from his side, so when one of the pieces of iron was about to hit him with his fist, the dark-haired man beat him by hitting the scarecrow right in the stomach. But the second one had already attacked him from behind, pinching his neck, starting to strangle and preparing to beat, but the guy did not give up and hit the opponent with his elbow, throwing him away from himself, and then the blow fell on the head of the scarecrow, leaving cracks. Pieces of the scarecrow's armor flew off from the place of injury, which meant the beginning of the second-level battle. All the scarecrows began to move faster, coming from behind, grabbing him by the hair, wrists, arms, legs, not letting him move, while the damaged scarecrow was running straight towards the guy with a swing, giving the guy a punch in the face and then in the stomach. And so blow after blow all over the poor man's body, while the density of his body tissues and blood clotting increased due to the increased pain threshold. But this did not save him. When the dark-haired man was already bleeding all over, the scarecrows let him go, stepping aside. The stamina level dropped below 10%, which activated the perk of the strongest in hell, which gave regeneration, and the guy got a little bit. The broken one, sitting on his knees in front of the enemies, was already thinking of running, but he was stopped by the fact that he did not even break any of them and gradually began to get up, addressing them like buckets with nuts who had learned martial arts. He put his hand out to the side to try something. The hand lit up with lightning and a wooden club appeared from it, which he resolutely directed at the target. This reinforced infernal club will not last long, but it has a great killing power, which is quite good in this situation. With a running start, the dark-haired man quickly ran towards the enemies, shouting, preparing to strike the first target he hit. One of them was standing in an attacking position ready to strike, but the guy beat her by hitting her hand, thereby breaking it, forcing her to fall off and fall on the tile. The place of damage sparkled and the scarecrow looked at it, updating data on its target. A blade appeared from the robot's second hand, which scared the guy very much, since the others also had weapons and all had different ones, which were then all directed at the intimidated Hyunmoo, who was subsequently killed. This time he managed to live for 5 days, 8 hours, 4 minutes and 16 seconds, which is already quite a lot for such a place, especially with a low level. Having been reborn, they immediately went on the attack, but he managed to dodge to the side and then struck at the Scarecrow himself. After he knew that he was acting dishonestly, but he tied the Scarecrows to a post with a rope, realizing that with the help of help in battle one by one if he was able to kill these Scarecrows. And he began to quickly strike at one of them, breaking his armor and finding a weak spot to hit. Already about to hit him, he was stopped by a statement about the beginning of the battle of the third level, which forced him to laugh because he believed in his strength. He decided that the stronger he was, the stronger he became. But without finishing that Scarecrow, it managed to kill him earlier. The third level turned out to be much more difficult than the previous ones, so they started killing him several times, over and over again. Either by grabbing his neck from behind, then by a simple kick to the face, or by throwing over himself, even by kicking his foot to the side like a ball, or by an ordinary slap in the face that stopped his neck. It was as if he got into a hand-to-hand tournament. How many martial arts are there in their database? Leaning against a post, the guy sat and thought, but there wasn't much time for that. The Scarecrow started coming up to him again to finish him off, but the guy didn't give up. He didn't think he would die in a normal fist fight and decided to go on the attack. Pushing off, he pounced on the enemy who was able to evade the first blow, but the dark-haired man did not lose his head and turned around and struck a second blow with his foot, which the target successfully blocked and again updated the data, starting the fourth level battle. While Hyunmoo was stunned, the Scarecrow did not hesitate and sent 2 fingers straight into the guy's eyes, hitting the target. The guy falls and starts screaming at the top of his head, covering his eyes with his hands and kicking his legs in pain. At this time the piece of iron opens its mouth and sharply bites the poor guy who has not yet moved away from his eyes by the leg. This forced him to open his eyes and look, but not to stop screaming, but forcing him to even scream louder, and the Scarecrow still wouldn't let go of him and eventually killed him. Again. For the 9th time, Hyunmoo realized something, and first of all, that the 4th level of combat is the limit for Scarecrows and that the variations of techniques are over, so after getting used to it, he can already fight back and dodge. And secondly, it is that the Scarecrows have a script of movements and techniques beyond which they cannot go out, and if you interrupt the script halfway, the Scarecrow begins to slow down, as the new script is being adapted to the situation. Having put all the Scarecrows together at one point, Hyunmoo intended to deliver the last glittering blow, since in the third he realized that it was not necessary to destroy the Scarecrows, because after receiving a certain percentage of damage, they themselves turn off, and therefore there is no need to break them to the end. And realizing all this, he swung his leg and hit them all at the same time, throwing them back and hitting each one in turn, destroying each of the Scarecrows. Thus he managed to win and the task was completed. Standing in a victorious pose, he finally shouted out with joy that he had succeeded and, after looking at his former enemies, exhaled with relief after everything. From fatigue, the guy could no longer stand, and because of this he fell on the tile without strength and began to curse the Scarecrows, because Hyunmoo wanted an opponent of his level, and it was a fight at the master level. Rising up, he began to reason about how exhausting and long the fight was, that he managed to memorize all their martial arts scripts by heart, and decided that it was better for him to just look at the award he received and return home. The SSS level luck perk increased the value of his reward, which is why a heavenly cradle card appeared in his hand, which then turned into a yellow handkerchief, which made the guy confused. But the table explained that he received the legendary item Heavenly Cradle, which has the effects of stimulating growth processes, as well as healing wounds and mechanical damage. The dark-haired man did not understand how this is stimulation of growth processes, since everything is clear with healing, but not very much at the expense of growth, and began to consider the received object straightening it. Of course, he was glad that he received the legendary item, but he had no idea how to use it, which was not very pleasant at the same time. And he came up with the idea that suddenly he would become smarter if he tied it on his head, and taking hold of the 2 ends of the fabric, he wrapped them around his head, connecting them on his forehead until he realized what kind of bullshit he was doing. Throwing the handkerchief away, he was even glad that no one sees him here, because what a shame it would be. Then, squeezing it in his hand, he began to think what the hell he needed at all, because when he dies and is born, He is always fresh as a cucumber and 100% health, and decided that he did not need this rag. He was already going to sell it, since the legendary item would certainly give a decent amount, but when he opened the inventory, he found an egg that he had previously created from a mountain of mosquitoes. Deciding that what was written in the description of the handkerchief about growth would help him so that the egg hatched, he preferred to leave the rag for now. Covering the egg with a handkerchief, he began to expect that something would happen, but after sitting there for a few minutes nothing changed, and the guy decided that the handkerchief was still useless even for the egg and was going to take off the handkerchief, was already thinking of selling it. Until the fabric abruptly lit up, crumbling into pieces similar to a shell, which struck the dark-haired man, and in the place where the fabric moved away, an egg could be seen that began to crack. But the guy didn't think before that maybe a bloodthirsty monster would hatch out of him now. He didn't even know if he could cope with it. That scared he even began to imagine it. The egg glowed so brightly that he had to cover himself with his hands so as not to go blind and pull away a little. Abruptly, the egg opened completely and there was a little sleeping white-haired girl in it, which made the guy embarrassed. And the girl slowly opened her red eyes and quietly got up, trying to wake up to the end. Taking her wand and opening her wings, she simultaneously stretched and approached the guy, who began to grin, because she turned out to be smaller than he expected, and pulled his finger towards her. The fairy stopped after looking at him, and then clasping her hands bit him with her fangs. Hyunmoo got scared and started yelling that it really turned out to be a bloodthirsty monster, and instantly automatically removed his hand from her, swearing at the system. At that time, the fairy fell to the ground due to severe hunger, saying how he wants to eat, and the dark-haired one paid attention to this while she sat down and continued to ask for food pitifully. The guy sitting in front of her exhaled in despair and handed the candy to her, thereby offering it to her, and the white-haired woman grimaced and shook her head negatively. Hyunmoo decided to ask her what she wanted then, to which she pointed her finger directly at the guy, and the guy followed by pointing at himself, so coped with himself or something. The fairy only silently smiled as a sign that the guy was right when he already accepted that he really got a bloodthirsty monster, and gave her his hand. Inserting her wand into the guy's hand, the white-haired woman began to suck his blood through him. It was not the most pleasant feeling, so the dark-haired man decided that it would be enough for her or he would suck everything, decided to push her away, and she stopped the guy's finger and began to speak indignantly, saying that he would not interfere and that she would stop the blood now, and that was it. Pulling out the wand, she began to lick the bleeding site, which seemed disgusting to him. Although on the other hand, what did he expect from an egg extracted from a mountain of mosquitoes? When she finished, the fairy took off and told him about it while he was thinking about her as a mosquito fairy, because she even has a voice like a mosquito, and that after her his hand began to itch. And then, imagining herself in charge here, she demanded to serve her dessert, addressing Hyunmoo as a slave, which began to anger the guy, so he grabbed her with his hand and began to squeeze, indignant at the way she called him. But she did not stop showing off, saying that everything was delicious and he was a good servant. Because of what, the guy's grip became even stronger, on the contrary that it even hurt her, and this time she already turned to him as a butler, saying that he had very good blood. And Hyunmoo, resigned that she was not fixable, let the poor girl go, asking her name and at the same time calling her own, and the fairy, pouting her lips, still a little angry at the guy, was going to answer, but did not name her, because she forgot and it scared her very much. And the dark-haired man just exhaled, deciding that then she would be a mosquito fairy, and obviously she didn't really like this idea once she started puffing on him, until suddenly she remembered what made her glow with joy. According to her, she is a post-apocalyptic fairy. The guy thought that this meant that she was born to save the world after the end of the world. But no, it's not like that at all, because she swore that she would devour every single living organism that would still be alive. But everything is actually not as colorfully good as she says, smiling. While she was glowing with the joy of these memories, the guy stood in horror, thinking that he would have to kill her as soon as possible before it was too late, although the fact that this little thing was going to devour all life on the planet puzzled the dark-haired man a little. His blood is very poisonous, and she drank it calmly, but even when the dart with her got into the goblin's hand, she immediately blistered and nothing happened to her. While she was grinning, the guy was sitting in thought and poking at her began to tickle, at least it seemed so to her since it was tickling. Hyunmoo can't even summon the effective help in battle now because she is not hostile at the moment, and he has no idea what her combat skills and level are, and most importantly it doesn't look like he can get rid of her. Then you can make friends and make her your companion, so the guy thought. But the fairy had too much opinion of herself and pestered the tortured guy again with what she wanted to eat. The guy humbled himself and said that let it be so, since she was going to devour the whole world there, he would not care what she was sanctified about by agreeing. But he also thought not to call her by you or whatever she called herself, so he came up with a name for her like Ranyan, which the fairy really liked, and she began to praise him, saying what a wonderful name her butler had come up with for her. Hyunmoo told her that it was good that she liked the name at least, but everything turned out to be not so nice, because in the language of fairies this name looks like the phrase of the messenger of the apocalypse, which caused the guy to stand in a stupor while the fairy happily twitched her wings. After that, the dark-haired man decided to translate the topic and put a condition on her that if she was going to be his companion, she would have to promise the guy one thing. The fairy was surprised that there was only one, but decided to listen, and it turned out that the condition was not to eat people, which she did not really like. She asked him if it was possible to eat it, to which he refused, because he doesn't care about others, just the main thing is that she doesn't touch him. And even if she is very, very hungry and dying, the guy pointing at her with his finger said that she would find someone else, but just not him, to which the fairy was confused until the guy added that in return she would receive blood from him. The white-haired woman was delighted and agreed, because according to her, they fairies are gourmets, at the expense of which the guy thought that even though they are gourmets, they should eat less. This dialogue would have continued even more, but the little one noticed the scarecrows and began to be interested in them, immediately realizing that they were not people, to which the guy put his hands on his belt a little and majestically replied that these were victims of his magnificent fighting skills. But his triumph did not last long, as he noticed the scarecrow torn into two, although he did not remember tearing any of them apart like that. He remembered the blow when he forced with all his might on all the scarecrows at once, but it could not be that then he could break the ass, he would not have had enough strength, at least he thought so. But a table appeared that said that the skill of the help in battle received an upgrade of heroic strength, and the guy thought that maybe this upgrade works only within the framework of the use of the skill? And better than guessing, he decided to check because practice is always the best test. Taking one of the less broken scarecrows and putting it right in front of him, he stood in a fighting pose and swung his fist towards the enemy, striking with all his might. Thereby he managed to tear off one of his hands, the mechanisms of which scattered in different directions like the hand itself. The fairy who appeared from behind the dark-haired man began to admire him, how he could do it just bang and there is no hand, and that she also wants to try the same way, and while the guy himself was amazed at his strength, she flew up to the head of the same scarecrow, and repeating her butler hit her hand right on it. The head of the scarecrow broke into small pieces, which struck Hyunmoo, but the familiar words that the enemy was identified were heard sharply, and all the iron scarecrows began to rise on him. The guy immediately began to fight, getting up in a ready-to-attack pose, waiting for an attack, and the scarecrows began to approach surrounding the dark-haired man, but not to attack. He was identified as a Superman, and the attack mode turned off. The guy did not understand what had happened and what they were talking about at all, until one of the pieces of iron pointed to a mountain of broken furniture that Hyunmoo had not noticed before when he came in. When the guy realized what was required of him, he began to disassemble the furniture, putting them in another place, and disassembling most of the fairy felt some delicious-smelling smell and flew to him, directing his butler there, pointing his finger at the right place from where the smell came. The guy gradually began to make his way through the furniture, pushing aside the one that stands in his way to the indicated place, following the baby. In the place from which the smell emanated, there was a table at which the skeleton of a man sat on a chair, to which the fairy was beckoning. Flying up to him, the fairy immediately began to say what a yummy thing it was in her opinion, and breaking off her finger began to gnaw it while the guy stood in shock and watched it. But he got tired of it and grabbed her again, started swearing that you can't eat people and even the dead too, but she started squeaking that he took away from her not yummy. Apparently intending to give her that piece, the dark-haired man noticed a letter under that hand and took it out and began to read. The beginning was very gloomy. It was written in it that the person who wrote it made a lot of mistakes, and for 3 years the level of complexity has increased to a nightmare, and their life has been getting worse since then. After all, as soon as they were born and breathed the poisonous air of our world, children immediately died, because of which all families were terrified. The owner of superpowers also cannot stand this life, and one after another died, and as it was said in the news, some committed suicide. Hope is fading every day, and humanity will no longer survive. When he finished reading the letter, Hyunmoo thought it was true or not. But if you remember the first letter from the system, and when he first got to Hell, that he entered the location of Hell being a user of a record low level, then this explains a lot. In fact, the Hell in which he is now is the future of the Earth, and it turns out that the highest caste of superpowers will also die out. Now, scratching the back of his head, the guy began to think whose letter it was, while the little fairy at the same time continued to gnaw the bones until she came across a mysterious thing for her that she showed the guy before eating it, with the question whether she could eat it. Hyunmoo did not answer the question, but only said that it was a stone of return, and, taking out and looking at his own, decided that he looked like the one he had with everyone. The fairy held this stone in her little hands and said that it belonged to this skeleton, after which the guy asked to give it to him, to which the little one agreed and pulled it into his hands, but when he touched it, the stone lit up, which threw the fairy away. The glow made the guy nervous because he didn't understand what was going on, and he couldn't take his hand away from him until the stone abruptly began to crack, and as a result we broke into small pieces, and strangely the guy's hand hurt after that. When the stone completely disappeared, the guy brought his trembling hand to himself and looked at it, and found some kind of sign on it, after which a table appeared that said that the stars were watching him. And then, abruptly, some kind of black hole appeared from the ceiling, which scared the guy and the fairy, too, so she, as if nothing had happened, just started to fall out of there, leaving the dark-haired one and finally saying that she believes in him. He only shouted at her to come back, but there was no need for it, she had already flown away for a long time, and the unknown darkness began to suck the guy until he completely turned out to be in an unknown place similar to space. He was confused and did not understand where he was, so he began to shout and call Ranian, gradually moving forward until a table appeared in which it was said that the advancing star Beryl knew that he had absorbed the star fragment. And suddenly some crystal flew in from somewhere that scared the guy because he didn't understand what it was. But the table said that this Beryl was enchanted by his reaction, and then he flew away, refusing his fragment of a star. The guy was so angry that he was ready to tear even metal because he didn't understand who he was to be disappointed in him, and showed him the middle finger after him. Out of anger, he began to knock on the table, saying that he had never heard of any such stars and asked to explain why the information was unblocked. It said that the lords of the stars are cosmic beings who rule each their own kingdom, and these beings put particles of their power into star fragments, and send them throughout the universe so that these fragments find worthy agents who can serve the lords of the stars and help them expand their possessions. Hyunmoo didn't understand why people like them would be interested in him, but the table kept telling him about his own, or rather that the user, that is, Hyunmoo himself, found a star fragment, and this means that the lords of the stars want him to become one of them. The guy at first did not understand what a star fragment was until he remembered about the stone that Ranian found and realized that it was not a stone of return but a star fragment. His thoughts were interrupted by some sound that he noticed by looking up somewhere, and from there flew several similar to the last crystal Beryl other crystals that differed only in color. They all started circling around the uncomprehending Hyunmoo. The first was the Whispering Star Monstrel, who wants to develop his talent for charm with which he can captivate and mislead everyone around, and the next was the Conqueror Star Arden, who promised to teach him the command of an army of steel and fire. There was also a hungry Star Egelim who invited him to go with him in search of the serpent that swallowed this planet. The Star of Destruction Tal offered him a whole world that can be controlled by someone else's hands, and the Star of Tears Verde promises that one day he will become the ruler of the world of the dead. The dark-haired man was spinning around looking at each one. I don't understand what they are talking about at all, and the table explained that these creatures see potential in him, and want to invest in his development. I don't wait for him to demonstrate his abilities to them. The guy started asking questions about how to invest in his development, but they only told him to just choose a star. But he didn't know how to choose a star because he needed details because he didn't understand anything. Therefore, let's start in order. To begin with, The Star of Destruction Tall is a gray cardinal enjoying strategies and conspiracies that he controls the masses while remaining unknown. His entourage is a dagger and poison in the wrong hands. He is the mastermind of any conspiracy. His adherents are secret organizations ruling the world. The next star is the Star of Tears of Verde. He is the father of grief and sorrow, also the lord of the army of the dead. His element is human despair and grief, the loss of unfulfilled hope and hopeless struggle. The hungry star Egelim is an insatiable greed embodied in the form of a snake, and hunger always reigns in his kingdom, and he wants to devour the whole universe. The next whispering star of the monstrel is her element of inciting passion in the light of day and treachery under the cover of night, because she shines brightest next to the one who radiates light himself, and even the most powerful creature falls at her feet if she wants to. The conqueror ardent star is a star of thoughtlessness and impotent malice, because he burns everything with fire and cuts out all enemies to one. In his senseless anger he wants the world to blaze with fire, and he doesn't care if he only rules the scorched earth. After the story, the guy thought that they seemed to have a personality disorder and the psychiatric hospital was crying for them, and the table answered him that the stars were drawn to those who were like them, thereby hinting at Hyunmoo himself, which means he is an intriguer, a womanizer, a sadist and has insatiable greed and also a maniac capable of genocide? He shouted that he could admit that he was not a good person because no matter how you look at him, it was as if there was nothing good in him, but not so much. The stars swirled around him, not understanding what he was thinking about there, when he admitted that he was not so good, but he didn't seem to be so bad, because he didn't seem to have done anything shameful, although he might have done it, but he just doesn't remember his bad deeds. In any case, he's not as crazy as these stars by his opinion. And he decided to ask the stars themselves a question about what would happen when he made a choice, and one of the stars flew up to him, revealing himself, thereby giving a look at what the future awaits him. The battle with monsters, politics, military, police, and much more they offered him. He did not believe that they would be able to give it all to him because he had been through so much, and they were clearly not telling something. There was some kind of catch. So he asked what was required of him in return, and all he was told was to serve the chosen star and nothing else. The stars patronize and help their ward grow up and then asked through him, these are all conditions. He was wondering if it was necessary to make a choice right now because he himself was not yet sure what exactly he wanted. But the opportunity to choose a star is a very rare and important event, and when the stars are convinced that you are able to overcome any obstacles, they will lift you to incredible heights of power. According to these words, the guy realized, folding his arms on his chest, that right now they could not actually offer him anything, but only in the future, to which the stars were outraged by his arrogance. The guy took it like they were kind of telling him to watch his tongue, and the guy turned to the stars again, telling them that getting power and might without effort is of course great, but they found him and not him. The guy started pointing at himself with his thumb, and it turns out he doesn't know them at all and sees them for the first time, and they are already asking to make a choice for life. Of course, this is a statement without guarantees and no contract, although in the world of people it is customary to give guarantees even to a used car seller, and then take more care of the buying side than they did. The guy began to explain to them. And abruptly the conqueror star lost interest in him. The consequences fly away from him. But the guy didn't care about it, after which the stars tell him that they will give him time to think. The dark-haired man thanks them for their care, waving his hand at them, and promises them not to delay with the answer, after which the cosmos began to disappear and the guy got into the very room from which he got there. All the stars flew away, but one of them decided to stay, and the guy, noticing her, asked then what she was up to, and she pricked him and flew away, leaving the guy alone. It turns out that in this way the Whispering Star Monstrel awakened in him some kind of skill, or to be more precise, the legendary skill of the Lord. The guy understood that she was giving him a generous bribe, although this is quite strange because if they are so powerful that they can distribute such legendary skills to anyone they want, then why couldn't they stop the extinction of humanity under the yoke of the complexity level of hell? Hyunmoo thought about it, because in his time there are many people who could easily become their agents, but even people with superpowers could not stop the Daconates of light. And what if the guy thought, looking at the mark on his hand, this was the plan of these very stars, that is, to destroy life on Earth? And taking that very hand in his fist, he decided that he should learn more about these stars. It has been 3 days since he returned to the real world after finding himself in the forest. He was building up his power in hell, But he suddenly realized that there were some issues that he urgently needed to solve in the real world, so he returned. For example, such a question as about the absence of a single return location, because returning from some forest, some child passing along the way may think that he is a homeless person, as it was once before. He teleports anywhere and always looks like some shabby bum, and he needs to figure out a way to return home more unnoticed. After some time, when he got to the house of his colleague Yumin, he told her that he wanted to buy a house, and the girl was slightly surprised by this unexpected idea. And the guy began to explain that he just wanted a home, strong walls, clean and bright as a medical office. But the blonde said that this was not the case at all, and the guy, slightly upset, took her answer as the fact that such houses did not exist. But then the girl explained to him that yes, of course he had a lot of money, but he got it illegally because he didn't even register as a user of superpowers, and according to the documents he was just a fan of the level with 0 stars without superpowers, which slightly hurt the guy, and he was upset. Then the girl quickly added to calm him down a little that she did not mean that he did not have the right to the house, but simply people would not understand where he got so much money from. After Hyunmoo took a shower, he began to cook noodles for himself. You think that Yumin is still right and you won't be able to buy a house yet, especially such a house that he wants is not so easy to find. And as she said to the blondes, if he gets a house, the surrounding people wonder how he could afford it with his beggarly salary, even though he doesn't have so many acquaintances. It would be better for him to register as a user after all, since this way he will be able to manage his finances more freely and legally receive a rank. To break the egg and add it to the food, he remembered about the star that left without waiting and thought why the system asks him to choose only one star, because each of their offers is tempting, so why should he choose? And he resolutely intended to get everything at once, and he doesn't care that the planet is waiting for the apocalypse. His task in this case is to become stronger than everyone and survive, and then he will be left alone, and will be the king of the world. He was ready to do everything so that all these stars would give him their powers at the same time. During his dreams, he didn't even think about how he looked from the outside until the bespectacled one came to tell him to stop posing with chopsticks and sit down to eat. Having already sat down at the table to eat, they turned on the TV on which the news was on, which said that the captain of the Taesung Lee Ji-tae clan announced an upcoming expedition to Danjin Baekdu, since it was already a long-standing plan of this clan to barricade this Danjin and ensure the safety of the inhabitants of Korea. Hyunmoo and Yumin watched the news carefully, not believing that this time they had already decided to barricade this dungeon, and this is the first time since the disaster in North Korea, if the guy is not mistaken, which the girl confirmed because the population of North Korea was forced to leave the country because there was a massive leak from the dungeon. The dark-haired man asked what kind of massive leak. The girl replied that this is what they call the mass escape of monsters from the dungeon into the real world, and this dungeon is a 5-star level backdoor and monsters are found there, and such monsters can only be fought with weapons loaded with mana. In her opinion, it's like suicide to go there, and Lee Ji-tae probably took it only because he was the only one in history who was able to clean up this dungeon before he could pull off such an operation. None of the clans even thought about going north. The guy listened attentively to everything, completely forgot this story, and continued to eat, taking noodles with chopsticks while the news continued to go on TV. As it turned out, the state testing of superpowers users will come in 3 days, and this year a record number of test takers are expected, where the Taesun clan will look for recruits for a raid on the Danjin Baekdu next year, which is quite interesting to Hyunmoo. He decided that he needed to register for this test, and the girls started to get angry at him, not because he wants to apply for this test but because he still can't finish eating at last. And then 3 days later, as it was said, the very testing began to take place for which such a large crowd gathered, among which was Hyunmoo. One of the participants started shouting at the dark-haired man to move, addressing disrespectfully that he insulted the guy, and he maliciously turned to the caller who was afraid of him and apologized politely, and asked again, and realized that he had come to the testing for the first time, which the guy confirmed. Although there was one time when he was still tested, and it was in a boarding school when he was still small, but he did not remember why it was decided to test him then. But he didn't tell the man about it. Let's ask about it. He just said yes for the first time, to which he replied that he knew it because he looked like a beginner. The man began to explain to him that they do not divide the test takers into hunters and beginners at all, and it turns out there is a complete mess because no one is watching the queue and the test takers themselves are just to see. Hyunmoo asked again about the hunters, to which he replied that when the Taesun clan announced the recruitment, everyone immediately rushed to test, and after the guy decided to ask if this man was here for the same reason, and he said that such a task was not in his power, and he just came to update his level. As he admitted earlier, he did not tell anyone what his level was, but the Commission will now be able to officially confirm that he has a superpower that makes him very valuable to society. But the dark-haired man almost did not listen to him and began to reflect on what the man had said earlier about what registration means in order to show his value to society. However, superpowers often surpass even firearms, so it's not surprising that a person with superpowers will want a better position in society for himself. He was so lost in thought that he didn't even notice how the queue had advanced, and he had to go ahead, so the man pushed him closer. And he kept thinking that this is also a form of control and how cleverly it was invented because the registered user is always under their supervision, and they will know if he does something. Hyunmoo decided that he needed to reach a high status as soon as possible and then he could do whatever he wanted, and finally the next group was called, in which Hyunmoo was. The testing will take place in 3 stages such as identification, assessment of characteristics, and assessment of skills. Identification is just checking documents at the front desk, so there should be no problems with this. But a blood test is taken to evaluate the characteristics, and only the result is obtained later, and then only after that the skills are evaluated. To put it simply, it's just an assessment of combat abilities and about 100 points is the norm. Well, the test results are summed up so it's not scary when I got less than 100 points. And finally it was Hyunmoo's turn. Going into the office, he was asked to wake up his hand in some kind of apparatus until the end of what he did. A high score is far from an indicator of how good a hunter is in battle and no one will pay much attention to a low score. During the check, he was told that there was a ball inside the device and he should plant it with all his strength, after which the guy began to look for it. Groping for it with his hand, he did as he was asked. But a crack was heard and the ball exploded, which surprised the doctors very much. They were shocked like the guy himself. The guy quickly took his hand out of the device while the doctors were trying to figure out what the figures showed the test result. They were shocked thinking that the device broke down because what kind of indicator does it have if even the device is buggy because even when Lee Ji-tae was tested nothing broke, and they just transferred to the fact that this device is old. The dark-haired man decided that he had broken the device and began to apologize, but the doctors said that everything was fine and it was a small technical problem and there was nothing unusual about it. They just needed to make some other settings. While they were fixing something, the guy decided that he still needed to restrain the force. When everything was ready, he was told to take hold of the ball inside again and reaching out, he squeezed it this time not with all his strength, not knowing whether this would affect the result. But the equipment broke down again and the doctors brought everything back again, blamed the server problems, and told him to wait a little bit again so that they set it up while the guy wanted to leave as soon as possible. As a result, he was put under consideration because nothing was clear about his skill strength. Having finished checking on everyone, they said that they are now forming 3 queues. The applicant with combat skills go to the right, the applicants with protective skills here, and the rest who have an intermediate skill or belong to the category of buffs, and the leftmost row. But the dark-haired man was under consideration and he did not know where to go, and it seems that this means that a more detailed check of his skills will be required, so he remained standing still. One of the test takers thought that it was impossible to just test in practice. No, they need to play with scientists, which Hyunmoo completely agreed with. She asked him if his skill was similar to the intermediate one, which caused the guy to think and not confidently answered that it looked like that, and the girl was glad that at least this was sorted out. The next question she asked was whether he was going to take the hunter skills test, to which the guy agreed and she pulled him a leaflet and warned him that this time there would be an unusual test for hunters and it would be conducted by the Tae-sun clan. Although the position of a hunter seems outwardly attractive, it is associated with an increased risk to life and health, and only a few of the hunters become millionaires, and the rest of the hunters get not only the risk, but are also forced to work like all people to make ends meet. Such morals were read to him by the girl. But the guy wants to become a hunter not for money, and the girl asked why. Then maybe because of fame or influence, or maybe a debt to the country, to which the guy replied that he did not know and that there were rumors that in the future humanity would die out due to the fact that the difficulty level in the dungeons would rise to impossibility. And the girl just smiled awkwardly, and replied that well, it could be like that and handed him his certificate of registration as well as a leaflet, a map and a list of necessary contacts and gave a small hint that the topic of testing for hunters is Dungeness. The dark-haired man took the envelope after checking all the documents, and was going to leave at the last, saying that he was wondering what kind of dungeon they had prepared. After that, a green car drove up to the building, from which Lee Ji-tae got out, who was immediately met by security, from whom he asked how the preparations were going and was told that everything was going according to plan. Heading into the building, one of the guards said that the Red Butterfly team had already arrived and many clans had a grudge against them, but he had nothing to worry about because in the end their goal was to compete with the Tae-sun clan and not among themselves. But Lee Ji-tae denied it because he knew that they were not here for the sake of competing with them, but for the sake of an expedition to the north. The Red Butterfly team has very talented strong fighters and some of them with rare talents, and they also did not take part in any competitions until the Tae-sun clan announced recruitment for an expedition to the north. The blonde one would have accepted them without a competition, but since they want to compete, he will allow them to do so. Heading down the corridor, he asked the guard what other applicants there were, to which you answered 20 levels below and the Red Butterfly has no competitors, but one person still interested him because he found out that he had unusual skills and handed over a tablet where Lee Ji-tae was shown to Hyunmoo. He asked what kind of unusual skills and he replied that he owns a skill of poisonous blood and also showed photos and videos with testing where tests showed increased toxicity. This of course impressed the blonde, but the skill of poisonous blood has many side effects, and if his blood is spilled during the battle, then his companions may suffer, but she still said that she would keep him in mind. Right now, Hyunmoo was standing at entrance B and waiting for the group he was in to enter there to be called. While waiting, a man in a suit approached him and handed him some strange thing and naturally the guy did not understand what to do with it, so he started calling this person to explain, but he ignored him and left. And finally, the participants were called to enter the door, and as soon as they entered, they were greeted in the dungeon of Gymnasium No. 3 at the Bureau of Superpowers Users of Yongsan. They were also watched by Lee Ji-tae from afar while they announced that they were presenting them with a simulation of a 2-star class Ukrainian dungeon, and their goal in this testing was to collect as many knuckles as possible similar to those that each of them received before testing. The dark-haired man looked at the object that was given to him before entering and realized that this was the same knuckle that he should find. The topic of the test was a dungeon, and they are given 3 hours to survive in this dungeon. Hunters began to think about drawing on the ground that now each of them has 1 knuckle for monsters. They get from 1 to 3 knuckles and the winner will be the one who collects the most knuckles, which means that monsters are not the only goal here and that they themselves can also be considered a goal. So the man with glasses suggested acting as a team, from which Hyunmoo immediately refused and said he would go alone. He immediately began to persuade him that they have a user with the ability to impose a shield as well as a healer. But this did not convince the dark-haired man and he still insisted on his own because there is only one reward and there are many of them if they go together, then they will have to share the reward and that's why he wants to go alone. Then the second of the hunters joined in, shouting after them to the guy that they had 4 less chances and that for sure other applicants were walking in 5s. But he did not listen to him and wished good luck as he left. But it's not that simple. He didn't want to give up and grabbed Hyunmoo by his hood and started saying that he wouldn't let him go so that the chip wouldn't go to the other team and that he would give it to them. The dark-haired man did not want to do this and decided to take this guy's chip for himself, so swinging his hand, he hit him on the neck, after which he passed out and fell to the floor. The guy decided that he would not leave until everyone else gave up their chips and slowly began to approach them asking who wanted to be next, but the one with glasses immediately gave up, which Hyunmoo did not understand and thought that he wanted to outwit him. But no, he threw his chip at Henny's feet, who asked if he was seriously giving it to him, and what they would do without it next, and the man with glasses began to explain that there was nothing in the rules about players who had lost all their knuckles, so at least he was not in danger of disqualification. And he also just knocked out their shield caster, so even if they tried, they wouldn't be able to beat him, which was even smart, for which Hyunmoo praised him and said that only the knuckles were important to him, and he wouldn't beat them, after which the bespectacled man calmly exhaled. Lee Ji-tae, who was watching everything from the side, said about one of the red butterflies how similar it was to her, robbed other applicants on the knuckles and went alone. Her class is only 2 stars, but when she acts together with her clan, they are quite capable of clearing a 3-star dungeon. The guard was surprised at this when he continued that if they were joined with a stronger team, they could achieve more. But the results are not so important to him, but what matters is whose talent is so great that it will lead him to victory, because in this simulation, not only survival skills are important, since they also test and choose the best talents, and they have special monsters for this test, so it will be fun. These robots are the latest development of the DW plant, and its prototype of a fully autonomous android. Its fists are equipped with amplifiers and its skin is impregnated with the spores of the mushroom monster extracted in the Chernobyl dungeon, and its working name is Mushroom Droid. Although the name is not very good, this machine is the peak of modern military industry because it has high combat accuracy, increased strength and is reinforced against mana attacks, and its impregnation of the epidermis also has regenerative properties and this ensures low repair costs. The guard thought that few users would be able to fight back against such a machine, but the blonde one thought otherwise, because most of his scripts are not such strong attacks and teamwork will be able to disable the user. Well, such individualists as the Red Butterfly will find this robot a very serious obstacle because she will have to study all his scripts first and besides, even if a loner wins, it will be difficult to get a bone from a droid that is hidden in his body. Lee Ji-tae wanted to say that you have not yet noticed a small surprise on the screen for him, or rather, for Hyunmoo, who met with one of these droids. For the dark-haired man, these robots turned out to be very weak because, as he said, they did not talk, did not move and were so primitive and their stats were shit, so he could easily defeat several of them. Taking the broken body, he used his skill and ordered it to be disassembled, thereby taking the knuckle out of the robot's body. I think there is some kind of catch here because everything comes out too easily. Until suddenly they announced that 34 minutes of testing had already passed and more than 30% of the knuckles were concentrated in several players, and that they would be announced now. In third place was Hongrin who had 7 knuckles, the second place was taken by a Red Butterfly with 9 knuckles, and in the first place was Kang Hyunmoo with 16 knuckles. He knew that he would be the first, and it would be better for him to put the goblin opponents because it was boring because even the scarecrows were stronger than the local monsters. And then he began to examine the objects he had obtained, such as mushroom skin, which was just an ordinary material, but interesting because if this is what the stuffed animal from hell is made of, then it is clear why they are so durable. And after putting a few pieces of this material on his hand, he stirred, which surprised the guy who immediately thought that he could try to make something out of it, and used the skill to create, after which greaves and with mushroom skin appeared, as well as leggings also made of mushroom skin, which became a little protection for him. After that, he went to deal with the rest of the opponents, while the Red Butterfly, having learned that she was in second place, and he was much more than him, began to get angry. But the red-haired girl was abruptly attacked by other participants trying to kill her to take all her knuckles, but she did not lose her head and evaded all their attacks, after which she attacked in response, defeating all with one blow. But the problems did not end there because she was surrounded by other players and this time there were a lot more of them, although they did not scare her, and she was already ready to attack until screams calling her were heard from the other side. It was Hongren who, having scattered people on the way, approached the Red Butterfly with concern, asking why she broke away from them because she could have suffered, to which she replied that she had few points. Hongren began to dissuade her from chasing these points while 2 more came up to them because their goal was only to be accepted into the expedition to the north, and there were already enough knuckles on 4 of them, which was later confirmed by Red Snake saying that together they had already collected 88 pieces. But the red-haired one wanted to connect their knuckles together because she had something completely different on her mind and she began to gradually leave, saying after calling so that she would not lag behind and jumping took off heading somewhere far away. At the same time, Lee Ji-tae finally paid attention to Kang Hyunmoo, asked the guard about him, who said that the results on his characteristics were still not ready yet, and the blonde remembered that he was probably the one with poisonous blood, which was later confirmed by the guard. I turned to him again. Lee Ji-tae wondered if it seems that he somehow feels calm in the dungeon, because all his behavior suggests that he already has experience, which means that he may be one of the illegal raiders. But the guard said that according to his data, the guy has no criminal record and no license revocation, and therefore maybe he is a foreigner at all, which seemed quite possible to the blonde because other countries do not have such strict legislation and decided that we would not exclude this fact. He can't wait for Red Butterfly and Kang Hyunmoo to face each other head-on, thinking what an interesting battle it will be. And at the same hour, the dark-haired man tasted mushroom skin until he vomited because it was still disgusting and he couldn't eat it even though he was hungry now. Until I felt a sharp sense of danger somewhere behind me and it was someone fast, that is, another user attacking Hyunmoo who miraculously managed to evade. It turned out to be a red butterfly who did not expect to see him alone at all, and then decided to joke that he had 100,500 henchmen who were waiting for the moment of the order to attack, which she did not even smile at. She had been waiting for this moment for a long time to finally attack, so she was not joking. The tables showed that the red butterfly of the 14th level, when Hyunmoo has only the 7th level, it turns out to be twice as high as it is. Without pausing for a second, the red-haired girl rushed into battle. The first attacked the guy who blocked the blow with his hands, trying to figure out where she got such strength from while she continued to attack without stopping, and he tried to dodge because if he didn't dodge at least once, he would die. Swinging her foot from above, she already wanted to hit the guy, but if he hadn't helped the fight, he wouldn't have been able to dodge and would have been a corpse of a cat. She continued to kick at the barely standing guy who dodges only thanks to this skill because he reacts to her movement in real time, but he can't guess in any way from the moment you can already lose on a retaliatory strike. Getting to his feet after the last blow, he thought it was dangerous to use the skill in public, of course, but it was higher than his level, so he could try it on her. Besides, he was already starting to get tired. Therefore, when she rushed to attack again, the dark-haired man activated an upgrade of heroic strength for the skill of help in battle, directing his fist with him at the girl running at him. After the whole ordeal, Lee Ji-tae was reviewing the moment of their fight while watching the film, until a security guard knocked on his car and told him that the man refused the offer without showing any interest even when he announced great favorable conditions. The blonde man had such a premonition because in such strong and talented people and as a rule there is a lot of pride, and asked what exactly he said, to which the guard said that something about the stars that surprised Lee Ji-tae very much. He thought he might have misheard, so he asked again, but the guard said yes, and he just thought it was some kind of youth slang and did not attach importance, and he did not know at all what the guy could mean by this, so he asked Lee Ji-tae about it. He said that this was also the first time he had heard about it, and turned the topic to the red butterfly, asking if she had accepted their offer, to which the guard replied that yes, everything was as they planned. She and her team initially signed up for testing in order to get into our expedition to the north. After that, the blonde thanked him for his good work and said that he would go home and they would see each other tomorrow, to which the guard of course said goodbye to the commander. Already on the road, Lee Ji-tae was thinking about the stars. He did not know which stars he was talking about and therefore could not be sure, so he decided that it was necessary to follow him. Let's go back to Hyunmoo, who was taken home by car by Yumin. Along the way, he was looking at some business cards that the girl noticed and asked what he had, that he then explained that it was a business card of some recruiting agency and that they found it right after testing, but the girl did not mean business cards, but she asked about the boxes on his hands. After opening it, the guy began to remember where he got it from. A red butterfly gave it to him when she apologized for her partner Hongrin, who was just trying to help her out, because then she interfered in their duel and he accidentally injured her. Hold out this box, she said that it was a prize for first place in testing and it rightfully belongs to him, and he would have got it if they had everything according to plan, and asked him to take it because it is very important to her. Well, that's why he had to take it. In principle, the thing was not bad. It was iron-grip gloves that increased strength and blocking of a rare level. After that, the girl remembered that she wanted to tell the guy that the sample that Hyunmoo gave her for sale was bought by Pak Wai-so again, and lately he has been buying a lot, because even if she gives someone else, this old man buys them from them. The dark-haired man did not understand where he had so many crystals, because even if he took rubies, then who would buy so many rubies, where to put them? Except that he works up to some high ranking and he needs crystals in large volumes for some suspicious cases, and in that case it would be more profitable to contact his boss directly. But the girl then turned the topic back to the prize again, asking if this was the whole prize, and then the guy remembered that there should still be money there, so turning the box over, he shook out the contents from where the envelope fell out. After that, the guy began to address Min in a bawdy voice, offering her to go to a restaurant because the cash prize was 50 million, and then the route of the car was rebuilt. Arriving home after the restaurant, the guy started talking about joining the association. It's something because even for a simple test they already assign a generous prize, to which the girl said that they never show how much they appreciate hunters, and the guy continued that ordinary people don't like it and they think that their life is a solid raspberry, and then Yu Ming warns, reminding him to be careful, and he is already relaxed and says that this is his money, and now he can spend as much as he wants. But abruptly the smell of blood is driven into his nose, which is why he is alarmed and begins to look around looking in the direction from which the same smell comes. Then he orders the girl to go to the car and lock the door, and that she does not leave until he returns, and he went to some alley. Turning the corner, the guy noticed people in suits lying on the ground, as well as that old man Park Wai-so in the distance. In order for the guy not to misunderstand, he first said that these people are Yakuza and they wanted to take over his stocks of crystal moss, because even foreign organizations have reached the fame of his product, and, in principle, not only to them, many hunters have already taken a trail and are looking for where crystal moss of great purity and volume appeared on the market, and if not for his intervention, the blonde could have suffered. The dark-haired man understood everything and decided to ask why he still came, and he had a small offer of cooperation with the Tae-sun clan, and the guy immediately realized that this person was somehow connected with them, so he needed crystals, but soon replied that he had already refused them today. But the old man continued that he had a dossier on him, of course, very meager because it is almost impossible to collect data about him, that you might even think that someone deleted any mention of him in the database. But he sells crystal milk formed only in the dungeons of the highest category, and besides, he was informed that during the test he showed himself as a person who has experience in dungeon raids, and according to the documents, he is listed as an ordinary sewer cleaner, and realized that something does not add up here. Hyunmoo tried to interrupt him, but he continued that it didn't matter to them which organization he worked with, but he just needed to work with them, and only after that he now let the guy say that he was grateful for his help, but he was wrong about the organization. And he wanted to say something else, but Park Wai-so, without listening to the rest, decided that apparently he had chosen the wrong method of persuasion and therefore switched to a more cruel tone. The dark-haired man tried to convince him to stop because the tables showed that he had received a power bonus thanks to the perk of the strongest in hell, but the old man had already sent his cane straight to the head of the guy who, fortunately, was able to dodge by leaning back. In this position, he wanted to explain everything to the old man who still continued not to listen to him, so he tried to strike back. The old man thought that from such a weak position his blow would be less effective, so he had nothing to worry about. But not everything is so simple since the blow was delivered powerful, which even pushed Sadov back. And he turned out to be strong because the guy used the gloves of a hunter who, as Park Wai-so thought, should have been a prize for a red butterfly, so he did not expect this in any way. After that, Hyunmoo maliciously explained to the old man that it was just self-defense. The old man took it as something that he likes to complicate his life, and taking off his coat, throwing it on the ground and then his jacket, decided that if he did not want to listen to him in a good way, then it would be bad. Then, throwing the jacket as a distraction at the guy, he quickly drew his sword, which was hiding in the cane, resolutely preparing to attack. The dark-haired man screamed that it wasn't fair, but the old man didn't care and he swung the sword right in front of his face, and the guy barely managed to dodge these attacks. But then the guy disappeared from the old man's view, jumping up after jumping over him, which he did not expect at all, and after he landed, the guy already decided that he would be able to attack calmly from behind, but Park Wai-so was not taken aback and quickly sent his sword at the guy again, almost hits right on target. The surprises did not end there, because immediately after this attack, the guy made his move by hitting the old man on the chin from below, and then grabbing him by the collar at the moment of his shock, he tried to knock him to the ground with the words that it was time for him to pass out. But the old man was still conscious and restrained himself by stopping the guy's target, after which he directed his sword to his throat, which the guy tried to protect, so the wound had to be on his arm. Hyunmoo fell to his knees in front of the old man, looking at his bleeding hand, while the guilty one said that he did not want to hurt him because he had no purpose to kill him, and now asked to answer his question who gives him orders. The dark-haired man began to laugh. The gray-haired man did not understand what was funny, he said, and the guy continued by asking if he had forgotten anything, after which the old man looked at his sword on which the blood began to evaporate. This made the grandfather remember that he had poisonous blood, and while he was confused, the guy did not waste a second grabbing and pinning the old man to the wall by the head. From the blow, the old man could not stand it, and dropped the sword, and the guy did not let go of his hand from his mouth and asked that he still had no resistance to poison, was it so? To which Park Wai-so did not answer because he was not so simple, so he hit the guy's arm with his elbow, thereby breaking it, which forced the dark-haired man to finally remove his hand, and then the old man kicked the guy in the stomach, pushing the guy away from himself to the wall opposite, and himself exhausted fell to the ground. Then the old man quickly began to look for the medicine in his pocket, and taking it out poured all the contents on himself while at the same time, as if nothing had happened, Hyunmoo began to approach him and ask for the same medicine if there was still left. Park Hyo couldn't believe how he was still standing as if nothing had happened because he was sure that he had touched his palms and ribs, and asked if he had some kind of recovery skill. The guy replied that it was possible and asked if he was ready to continue, but the old man said quite what the dark-haired one did not expect, and he said that he was here to offer him something and not to fight. Now the guy did not understand because he attacked first, but he explained to him that he thought he would understand if he used force, but it seems he showed more resistance than the old man expected. But Park Hyo was still wondering who was behind him, which made the guy a little angry because he had already said that he had no one and he was on his own, so now the old man asked where he got it all from then, to which the dark-haired man replied with a grin that it was a secret. Accepting this answer, the gray-haired man, putting away his sword, suggested that if he joined the Tae-sun clan, he would get everything he dreamed of, but the guy continued to insist that he promised himself that he would never work for anyone. However, approaching the old man, he suggested that he could work for him. Park Hyo grinned and said that he was talking complete nonsense, and that if he was going to fly in his dreams, then he would probably go and fix his tie and began to leave. While the guy thought that he would be useful to him because of his connections with people, but now knowing that he skillfully uses the ability and knows how to handle people and information, he definitely can't miss such a chance, and should get it for himself. Therefore, after the old man, he asked the question, what is it about the Tae-sun clan? Because he heard that they are weaker than the almighty Lotus of the third rank and their ordinary participant is weaker than the great unknown of the second rank, and does he think that Tae-sun and Lee Ji-tae are overrated, and why wouldn't he do something young and ambitious like him? Park Hyo pondered and replied that he thinks that people who consider the guy's words reasonable can be divided into two types, and turned around and continued that these are either fools who have no idea about reality, or losers drowning in their own faith the opportunity to achieve the same success as Lee Ji-tae. To which Hyunmoo replied with a grin that such a statement was quite harsh for someone who had just almost lost, because of which the bastard began to draw his sword again, and noticing this, the guy said that even if he tried to use this blade, he could not finish. The old man swung down on the guy, leaving a cut on his cheek, and said that if he had originally come with the intention of killing him, he would not have been able to resist him. The guy was standing by the wall in shock when there was a giant crack passing from two sides near him, which Park Hyo had just left with his sword. After which he continued that in addition, the Tae-sun clan has many assistants who are stronger than him and are controlled by Lee Ji-tae, and to hear such similar words from someone who has not even reached the 10th level is not even funny, so he put the youngster in his place. Who then asked what is so unique about this Lee Ji-tae, and without giving the old man an answer, he kept saying that he would show that he was better than him, just let him say how much stronger he should be compared to Lee Ji-tae. He answered the question with a grin, so he reached the 20th level in less than 6 months, and this is due to the fact that Lee Ji-tae had the support of such a clan as Tae-sun, because if he was an ordinary person, it would all take at least a year, and if he wants to prove that he is better than him, at least 2 weeks. After finishing, Park Hyo put on his coat and looked at Hyunmoo, who said that he would do it and would be able to convince him that Lee Ji-tae was better, and if he did succeed, he would have to work with him. The old man looked seriously at the guy and turned around to leave, said that they wouldn't even laugh at such a proposal, and continued to take off his hat that he didn't even know where he would train, but to hope that this place would be better than where Lee Ji-tae trained, and I finally left the guy alone. And then after that, Hyunmoo went to hell where he found a goblin, and immediately started fighting with him. The goblin turned out to be somehow weak. Having swung once, he was already able to knock him down, and then began to inflict a lot of blows on the lying one who was trying to defend himself with his hands. After numerous attacks, he brought his fists right into the mouth of the green one, thereby playing his mouth and putting a stone in his mouth, forcing him to chew every piece. During this time, he was already able to reach a new 15th level, while being watched by the Conqueror Star. Show your fist towards the sky. The guy noticed that his arm was crippled and bleeding all over, so he bandaged it on diabetes, and decided that he should not overexert his body so much. While out of nowhere, a fairy appeared who immediately started shouting at him that fairies were afraid to fight and how dare he continue to do this at all, and he only asked where she had been all this time. She ignored this question, asked what happened to her hand, decided to poke her wand there and started drinking his blood through it. Then the guy looked at her maliciously but did not interfere. Having calmed down, he began to think that everything was fine. If he died on the battlefield, he would be able to revive, although he was not yet completely sure that he would really come to life. At least everything was getting better when compared with early even-numbered attempts to find at least a couple of monsters to fight, and this was a serious advance. The problem was only with that monster, the goblin whom he met for the first time among all with whom he fought. He could not find only him, and he is most likely stronger than everyone he met. He would have thought even further, but he felt someone's presence and turned around and noticed him, the same goblin, and immediately jumped back from him, becoming a pose ready for battle, and ordered the fairy to hide. But she was no longer there, she flew away without listening to the guy. At that time, the goblin approached the mountain of corpses of his relatives and screamed when the guy told him in the back that he really did not think that monsters would be upset if they killed their kinsman. And after holding the darts in his wrapped hand, he told Tom to come closer so as not to waste time, which he immediately accepted the invitation to fight, growling maliciously at the guy. Soon, who was killed with a survival duration of as much as 12 days, 6 hours, 58 minutes and 4 seconds, and he was given an enemy quest on a wooden bridge where Hyunmoo is required to kill a goblin with a black hand and his difficulty level is hell. And lying on the ground after another death, he thought that he really could anger the goblin. But getting up he decided that in the end he was just a goblin, and he just needed to trap him like other monsters and get some poisonous buttons for the trap, as well as a deep pit and something else. But while he was counting everything he needed on his fingers, a goblin appeared from behind who instantly killed a guy who had managed to live only 1 minute since his last death. Already on the 6th attempt, the dark-haired man ran away from the green everywhere, who never lagged behind and did not give the guy a break. But at some point Hen got tired of constantly running away and stopping. He hit the attacker, because he was the first to start it all. The blow knocked the goblin back a few meters, and while the guy thought that he just needed to attack, the goblin did not hesitate and passed behind the guy, leaving a deep wound on him from which blood gushed out like a river. While the guy has not lost consciousness yet, he only now realized that he is not his equal, and decided to just hide after resurrection. Once an old man said that revenge only leads to more revenge and that forgiveness is the only way to win for real, and if that's the case, maybe he'd better forget about this goblin and start pumping. But no, the guy would rather die than run away like that, because he forgives nothing to anyone and never regrets his actions, and therefore he tried to get up, but the goblin inflicted another wound without allowing him to get up. He decided that if someone tries to stab him in the back, then he will make sure that they pay for it. And if he fails to do it, and he continues to run away from them, then the guy does not think that his pride will be able to endure it. After that moment, the goblin went in search of the guy since he had not seen him for several days and decided that he had finally escaped. But it was still too early to relax because he was not only able to resurrect but also very cunning, so you can't relax until he understands what the kid is up to, and in no case can you give him get to them at any cost. One of his relatives ran up to Torblin, who called him Curson and said that trouble had happened, and even though he told him not to go out, he had to say that the others were dying because someone had poisoned their water and they needed to return right away. This really scared the goblin in the red hat. After that, they went to the goblin's hideout, where many were already slowly dying, and those came to the water where they had fish and decided that someone had poisoned it, and it turns out they can no longer eat these animals. The goblin who told about it asked the one who is capable of such a thing, because there is no need to do this with another, since it is so easy to take care of us, to which he was very angry because he realized that it was he who was the only person only he is capable of it. But he did not understand how he found out about this place. Maybe he was watching him and then realized that it was better to catch him and not kill him until another goblin distracted him from his thoughts, who asked him to look at the child who had been looking for Curson for a long time, which he looked at and cried together with the child who turned out to be his cub. And then Curson started to leave when the other goblins tried to stop him, asking what he was going to do with someone who constantly resurrects because all they have to do is forget about the place so that he no longer has any reason to interfere with them, and that it's better to run away and find a new place before it gets even worse. But he didn't stop pulling out his sword, saying that someone there was whispering something to him, so they had no choice but to let him go. But before that, they noticed a scout who had just left but had already been killed by poison, and it was immediately clear that this was the work of a man. But it could be a trap, and Curson ordered everyone to return because the fact that he leaves traces behind him like this should know that he is trying to lure them away from the rest, which the goblin immediately understood, therefore also ordered and prepare for a surprise attack. The other goblins told him to come back too, because what would they do without him? But he said that he would stay here and find that person, and even if his progress is much faster than he expected, he is still not stronger than him because the way he breathes, walks, and all his habits he has already memorized while fighting with him and can kill him with my eyes closed, so I asked to leave myself here. The other goblins standing behind him still agreed, but told him to be careful because he could come back to life and things might not end so well, to which Curson told them not to worry about him, and he would definitely come back alive, and they only said that they believed in him, and he set off. I stepped forward. He heard a sound from one of the sides from where the dart began to fly, but he was able to stop it, telling the attacking guy not to hope for a painless death, after which he would turn in his direction. Hyunmoo was confident enough and said while wearing the donated gloves that he would give the goblins only one chance, a chance to die at his hands right now. Green did not understand what this meant, thinking that he was trying to buy time, for which he told him to think better, because if he really wanted to kill everyone with poison, he thinks they would still be alive, although this time a couple of his people died. But he is not sure what will happen next time, and coming closer to the goblin continued as he said he could come back to life no matter how much Green killed him. But he wondered how he would stop him from killing them. After that, the goblin took out his sword and pointed it at the guy, saying that he just needed to take him alive, he would cut off all his limbs and let him believe that he would regret it. But the guy just grabbed the sword with his hand, saying that even if he did, he would just kill himself and come back to life, and decided to put the sword away, explained something to the goblin. That he can threaten his family and that he is unable to stop him, and all the dark-haired man wants is revenge because he does not want to harm his family because they are not to blame, but if he continues to pursue him, who knows what he will do next time. This scared the goblin and even made him despair, thereby accepting defeat and throwing his sword to the ground at the guy's feet. After that, he asked if his life was really enough for him, to which he replied sternly that he had already said and there was no need to waste time, all he wanted was his life. Then the goblin told the man to keep his word and after killing him left this place, and that he would never raise his hand against his people again. And then Hyunmoo agreed and bent down, and began to pick up the sword, saying that if they had done so from the very beginning it would not have gone so far, until the goblin still did not give up, swung his foot at the guy, throwing him a few meters. When the guy fell, the goblin jumped on top of him, directing his sword in his direction, which the dark-haired man could hardly stop with his hands. The goblin hanging over him started shouting that he thought he would believe in this shit, but no, it's not that simple, he would never agree to it, and as he promised, his death would not be painless, and began to cut the guy's body. Those who started laughing, calling the goblin names, say that he should have killed him right away because his health dropped to 10% and the last survivor title perk was activated, and regeneration began. But this did not stop the goblin, and he tried to strike again at the guy who, rising up, quickly grabbed him by the throat, preventing him from moving, after which he hit him in the stomach with all his strength with his other hand, which caused him to fly into the wall but did not fall and quickly rose. Hyunmoo confessed to him that, to be honest, he had been holding back a little all this time and even now gave him a chance, after which the goblin tried to fight him back, but the guy quickly repeated the punch in the stomach again, pressing him against the wall, and then immediately hitting him from below in the chin. Curson thought he had beaten the guy enough and didn't understand how he recovered so quickly, thinking that he was hiding his skill, but still didn't understand how he became so strong. At this time, the dark-haired man did not stop and continued to attack, hitting him in the face, with his foot on his stomach again with his hand, and so on. After he said whether he felt something strange how someone so close to death could do such a thing, and asked him that such thoughts did not let him understand how it happened. Well, she added that there's nothing wrong with it, he was just careless. No longer able to fight, the goblin sat exhausted and listened to the guy's words that because he had been killing him with one blow all this time, it turns out that they never really fought, and it turns out he sincerely believed that he could kill the dark-haired whenever he wanted, so he became too careless, and it was only his fault. Green asked him to stop being such a cheeky person, because he can end up with garbage like a scoundrel as long as he stands on his feet, and that he will definitely get his head as a butt after trying to approach. He could not, and coughed up blood, after which he fell, which pleased the guy and he smiled. After that, Hyunmoo said that he thought that he was not going to be as careless as some, hinting at a goblin, and took out a dart, and he began to apologize for killing him all this time and asked to stop and listen to him, that the unblessed goblins cannot live here, and if he dies, then all his people too they will die, and the guy said that he did not want to harm the goblin family. But the guy was not touched a bit, and smiling, he asked again that if he killed him, then his whole family would also die, to which he exclaimed that yes, and they would not be able to survive. Then the guy decided, looking at the bloody goblin, that he was wondering if he would get experience for them by killing him, and mercilessly kicked the goblin on the head, after which it flew up, thereby killing the green one. Exhaling after a light battle, it was highlighted in the table that he defeated the goblin red helmet of the 21st level, and the task enemies on the wooden bridge was completed, and as a reward he received a silver chest, but after it was replaced with a golden chest because of the difference in difficulty. And then it was highlighted 3 times that his level was raised and his return stone was activated. It turns out he raised 3 levels for killing that goblin, and the next task will be in 21 days. And it also turns out that the Star of Destruction Tall was watching him. And then, out of nowhere, a fairy appears asking if the battle has already ended, which the guy confirms by offering to eat the goblin's bodies since he has already finished examining him. The fairy also wonders if he is looking for something once he examines it, but he replies that he was trying to figure out what made him so strong, because in general, his physical capabilities were too impressive to rely only on weapons, and it turns out there must be something else that distinguishes him from other goblins. And then he drew attention to the hand of the dead man, noticing some runes on it when the Star of Destruction Tall began to drive his hand, which for some reason the runes from the goblin's hand began to be removed and then, rising into the sky, stuck through the guy's hand. The table said that it was he who absorbed part of the Star of Tall's crushing, which is why the guy looked at his hand where the dark-haired mark was earlier. Thanks to what happened, he got a new legendary level family skill, but the guy almost didn't understand anything. Returning to the present, he came home to Yumin, who at that time was lying in bed thinking about her own until the guy started calling her, which distracted her from her thoughts, forcing her to pay attention to the dark-haired one. Wearing glasses, the first thing she asked him was if he was hungry, but he did not understand what the question was, and then gradually getting up, she said that there was not much food here and that he should wait until she went to the store. But that's not what Hyunmoo came for, so he grabbed the girl by the wrist, thereby stopping her. He was thinking about telling her the truth or not. Until the girl spoke first about the fact that Park Waiso came 2 days ago, and he asked if anything unusual had happened to the dark-haired man, and she simply told him that he wasn't here, which made her wonder why Park Waiso came at all and asked you. And the blonde immediately realized that it didn't look like it was related to the moss crystal and asked the guy while he was away, did something happen? But without giving the guy an answer, she continued that the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she didn't know anything about what was going on, and breaking out of the guy's grip, asked what he had been doing all this time and what he was hiding. Hyunmoo tried to calm the girl down, but she didn't listen to him and couldn't stand it. She screamed because she didn't care what it was. But if he involved her in something, then he should be held responsible, and he should say why she constantly has to wait for him to explain what's going on, and why he keeps disappearing and then reappearing. He never explains anything about what's going on, and it's so embarrassing for her, after which the guy grabbed her, hugging her to him, telling her to calm down and that he would explain everything. The girl was slightly embarrassed by the guy's actions, not that he could not understand why she was reacting like that, but since she was involved in all this, even if something inexplicable was happening, she always pretended that nothing had happened, and it was not surprising that she was under such stress. He always got help from her whenever he needed her, and he got to the point where he can't imagine his life without her. But if for now he keeps everything a secret, like now something happens to her in the future, and then in this pile of shit he will be left alone. If it really happens, it will come to that he can go crazy. So he started telling Yu Ming about everything, reminding her of the very stone he had shown her earlier. Sitting on the floor, they began to discuss about it. The girl asked that the stone leads to a dungeon like hell, which the guy confirmed. They say that this is why he disappears from time to time, and because of this it is difficult for him to understand how long he will be gone. Then the girl suggested whether it was possible that one day he would not return, to which the guy replied that this was why he wanted to tell her in advance about it, because no matter how long it would take, he would always return, and that he wanted her to become a beacon to which he would return. The blonde immediately agreed without hesitation and approached the guy, saying that she wanted to be a beacon and that he would tell her if he needed help, and if something she would definitely save him if necessary, and took off her glasses and smiled sweetly. The guy was confused because of this, and said that he needed to move away since he had not been in the shower for a long time. But the girl did not let him go, and lay down on his legs and looked at him, and said that she had not been there yet either, and offered to go together, which made the guy embarrassed. And so one day after their connection, since the guy missed the day of the meeting with Park Wai-so, he needs to act faster, and while he was thinking how to contact him, the worst of the options came to mind first. Seeing the car, Hyunmoo approached her where the old man was sitting and said that he would give him a ride. In the car, he says in disbelief that he was told that 2 weeks ago he was level 7 and now he says that he has risen to 13 levels. After that, the guy apologizes for breaking the promise because he had certain problems that the old man did not believe because they would not be able to check it in any way, which made the guy a little angry. I asked then what about the deal. Park Wai-so replied that given that he caused all these problems and returned, he would stop trying to get him to join them, and moreover he would increase the price for moss crystals by 15%. But the guy said that if the grandfather is going to do it, he wants to double the price, shows 2 fingers, to which the old man asked if there was any reason for this. And Hyunmoo began to be indignant because if he was going to violate their agreement, then he would need a little more than that, because he had already done so much to satisfy Park Wai-so's demand. Because of what he became enraged that it seems that despite the work done, nothing has changed in him, which is why the young man grinned, turning to the old man with the question, does he think that malice will solve all his problems? After that, the guy called for a large piece of crystal moss, the glow of which was visible even from the car, and this surprised the old man very much, and the guy continued asking if he knew what monopoly was. After all, he must know how valuable this crystal moss is, and no one else can get it, because everything is, as he said, he has a monopoly on them. If the old man continues to treat him as coldly, he asked him, what do you think will happen? To which Park Wai-so said that he was overreacting because he already gives a price comparable to crystal moss of the highest quality from 5-star dungeons, and moreover still gives 15% on top, and even if they are rare besides. Hyunmoo did not let him finish. They say that he simply has no choice, and having evaporated the crystal, he offered the old man to give him something interesting instead. Having passed it imperceptibly into the old man's palm, he said to look at it because there is nothing special about it, but suggested calling it just a simple pledge. The old man looked at the hand and noticed inside the ring a Vera Urhast, when using which the owner's feelings are temporarily doubled. Park Wai-so was shocked because it was a legendary item, which the guy confirmed. They say that he knew that someone like him would immediately recognize it because he has the effect of temporarily doubling the feelings of the carrier, and he is sure that even Li Ji-tae himself did not give him anything like that. And putting his hand under his chin, he seriously said that he was more useful than Li Ji-tae and offered to negotiate with the old man that he would keep him until he recognized that he was more useful than Li Ji-tae. And the old man at that time thought that this was without a doubt a real legendary item, and in comparison with the gloves he had seen before, it was much superior to them. But then he noticed something after which, after looking closely, he asked Hyunmoo about the fact that judging by the shape there is another ring that connects to this, and would like to know if the dark-haired one has whether he has the second. He said, pretending that he did not know, that he was not sure about it because he had found only this, after which the old man looked at the ring, and then back at the guy, and decided that in the end they should find the second part, and then the guy offered to continue their initial conversation. And Park Wai-so still accepted to send money as always in double the amount, as he asked why the guy was happy. But the problem was that because of such a large amount of money, Yu Ming would be difficult, and the old man told the guy to let him know if it would happen, and then he would make sure that he was sure that the National Tax Services did not notice anything else. Hyunmoo realized that he is experienced, and he does everything to make sure that the other person he is dealing with is satisfied, and that's why the guy is trying to win him over to his side. And the dark-haired turned out to be a little more cunning than the old man thought, because he had a second ring about which the guy told Park Why that he hadn't found it. It was a Ukelhatra obedience ring that could track the owner of Urhast's ring of faith, as well as temporarily lower the owner's experience by 50%. After a few seconds, Park Waiso asked if there was anything else that the dark-haired man and the guy would like, thinking and then smiling, pointing to the car, eventually asked what the name of this car was. That old man Park Waiso in the distance. In order for the guy not to misunderstand, he first said that these people are Yakuza and they wanted to take over his stocks of crystal moss, because even foreign organizations have reached the fame of his product, and, in principle, not only to them, many hunters have already taken a trail and are looking for where crystal moss of great purity and volume appeared on the market, and if not for his intervention, the blonde could have suffered. The dark-haired man understood everything and decided to ask why he still came, and he had a small offer of cooperation with the Taesun clan, and the guy immediately realized that this person was somehow connected with them, so he needed crystals, but soon replied that he had already refused them today. But the old man continued that he had a dossier on him, of course, very meager because it is almost impossible to collect data about him, that you might even think that someone deleted any mention of him in the database. But he sells crystal milk formed only in the dungeons of the highest category, and besides, he was informed that during the test he showed himself as a person who has experience in dungeon raids, and according to the documents, he is listed as an ordinary sewer cleaner, and realized that something does not add up here. Hyunmoo tried to interrupt him, but he continued that it didn't matter to them which organization he worked with, but he just needed to work with them, and only after that he now let the guy say that he was grateful for his help, but he was wrong about the organization. And he wanted to say something else, but Park Waiso, without listening to the rest, decided that apparently he had chosen the wrong method of persuasion and therefore switched to a more cruel tone. The dark-haired man tried to convince him to stop because the table showed that he had received a power bonus thanks to the perk of the strongest in hell, but the old man had already sent his cane straight to the head of the guy who